Hi, today I want to share my experience of losing the best thing that ever happened to me. I did it because I was greedy and wanted something better than what I already had. Hopefully my story will help people to value their relationships and not look for something else. I was married to my ex-husband for 2 years. We got married straight after college. My ex joined a corporate job with a high package while I became a housewife. My husband and I met at university. We were in different courses, but we had a shared group of friends which brought us closer. We started dating, but it wasn't serious. We were just testing the waters. As we spent more time together, we fell in love and decided to get married. Our marriage was going well. My ex had to work long hours because of his job after graduation. He was determined to make a name for himself. I told him I'd support him in his dream in every way I could. We were young and everything felt doable in the initial phase of the marriage. I thought it wasn't a big deal if my husband had to work late. I tried to be an understanding wife, but I failed miserably. I used to keep scrolling through Instagram. People my age were partying with their partners, while someone was going on a trip. I was in the kitchen waiting for my husband to get back. It started to get to me. I told my ex. My husband and I discussed taking a break and going on vacation, but he told me that he would do so at a later date. At the time, he had a lot of responsibilities and promised me that he would do everything he could to become financially secure. We had a good home and were still paying off our debt, but we were not wealthy. We were not at the level of wealth that my ex-husband had achieved. My husband wanted to get to that level. He told me in college that he wanted to become a really big man. I thought that since I loved him, it would be easy to support him and be there with him while he worked a life he really wanted. I was going to enjoy the benefits of a luxurious life as well with him. As it turned out, it wasn't really that easy. We were recent college graduates at that point in time, and everyone was enjoying life and showing it off on social media. I would get jealous of them enjoying their life, but then try to let that feeling go. This started affecting our married life as well. My husband would come home late from work, and I would tell him what I'd seen on social media about our friends. Either he'd ignore what I said, or he'd make some vague comment like, "Oh, okay." I'd get irritated and start fighting with him. He was already tired, and when I started fighting with him, he'd get really mad. We'd stop talking to each other for days, and then we'd start talking again when our anger was gone. I felt like he wasn't seeing the sacrifices I was making for him. I wanted him to value it and appreciate me. I told him the same thing when we were having an argument. He got really upset and told me that he did see my efforts, but I was forgetting that whatever he was doing was for our future only. I didn't like the way we fought, but there was no other option left for me. I was frustrated. I felt trapped inside our house, and in that marriage, my ex and I started getting distant with each other. Looking back, I think the distance was caused partially because of me, but at the time I thought it was his fault. I was upset at him for not removing the gap between us. Our fight didn't decrease. I kept telling him how he'd changed after we got married. Every time I said that, he'd get really angry and storm out of the house, slamming the doors behind him. We started speaking less and less to each other. Every time we did speak, it was always something related to the house or something that had to be done. I felt even more frustrated, as I felt that I was making all these great efforts for my husband's success, and we aren't even happy with each other. Even after all that, the days went like this, and we didn't even talk to each other properly. I was upset that he didn't try to talk to me. One day, he started talking to me over dinner. He told me that there was some work event, and he would like to be there with him. It was sort of an office party. He smiled at me, and I smiled back at him. We were finally going to a party, even though it was work-rated, and I was really excited. On the day of the party, I went to get my nails and hair done. It was long overdue anyway, and it seemed like a good day to go for it. I got ready and left for the party with my husband. It was a nice party, the venue was great, and the decorations were on point. It was at the rooftop of some 5-star hotel. We stayed at the Star Hotel, which had a great view of the city. It was my first time there and I loved it. I was enjoying myself, and then my husband introduced me to everyone. His colleagues were all around my age, and they were all really polite. I finally met his boss at the party. My husband introduced us, and I just kept staring at him. He was a very attractive man, slightly older than my husband, but really good on the eyes. He smiled at me, and then asked my husband how he was able to spend so much time at work when he had such a pretty wife at home. My eyes widened at his statement. It was a compliment. My husband just smiled at him and told him that I felt a bit guilty for not being more understanding. I thought I'd do better from that day onwards. We met more people and had drinks with his colleagues. Everything was going great. There was only one thing. I caught his boss staring at us more than once. I thought to myself, I had a feeling that it wasn't a coincidence that every time I looked in his direction, he was looking at me. I ignored that feeling in my stomach and tried to enjoy the party. It was great. We came back around midnight and were both so tired that we immediately fell asleep. The next day, my husband got busy with his work again. Despite my decision to be more understanding of my husband's work, I found myself becoming increasingly irritated and upset. However, I refrained from engaging in a heated argument. Days passed in this manner. I wasn't particularly happy, but I made an effort to maintain civility with my husband. One afternoon, he called to dinner, and he told me that his boss was coming home for dinner that evening. I asked him why he hadn't mentioned it before. He said he'd invited him that day. I didn't know he was going to invite him because he didn't tell me. He said it was a Friday night and they were casually talking. His boss mentioned something about having homemade food in the city, so he invited him. He told me that I'd have been fine if he hadn't agreed with me and asked me what I should cook. He told me he'd be home early to help me out, and that he can pick whatever I need from the grocery store after the call ended. I started cleaning up the house and preparing for dinner. My husband came in when I was in the kitchen when my husband came in and helped me out. Then he told me I could go get ready while he'd be here. I nodded, but I wasn't going to meet his boss in sweatpants. I couldn't decide what to wear for some reason. I wanted his boss to find me pretty. It was illogical, but I wanted it. I got ready and even did some makeup. When I went down, the boss had already arrived. He was sitting in the living room with a flower bouquet in his hands. He saw me and got up and gave me the bouquet. I was really impressed by him. He was really attractive and charming too. I smiled at him and he smiled back, which seemed a bit flirtatious. But then I thought I was making things up. We had dinner together and he kept telling me how much he liked the food. My husband was happy with that, and then his boss told me I had to give him my recipe for the apple pie because it was really delicious. He said it was delicious, so I told him, sure. Then we exchanged numbers so I could share the recipe with him. The evening went smoothly, and he left soon after. My husband thanked me for arranging everything so quickly, and I told him it was no problem. We then cleaned up and went to bed. My husband had to leave for work the next morning. He had to be at work early the next morning, so I went straight to bed. I was awake and scrolling through social media when I got a text from his boss. It was just a quick thank you for the dinner, but it made my heart beat faster. I replied that it was my pleasure, and that was the end of it. I looked over at my sleeping husband and felt a pang of guilt for crushing on his boss. I told myself it wasn't anything serious and it was just a silly crush. A few days later, I got a text from my husband's boss while he was in the office. He told me that he loved pie and needed the recipe. I shared it with him, but our conversation didn't end there. He kept making small talk, and I engaged in that conversation with him. It didn't seem like I was doing something wrong. I just felt that I was having a friendly conversation with my husband's boss, and I were exchanging texts all the time. He was really witty and charming, which was nice to talk to someone like this, especially since I didn't talk to my husband like this anymore. It was a bittersweet feeling, but we kept talking. My husband was so busy with work that he didn't even notice that my attention was elsewhere. I was completely somewhere else, and for the first time, I wasn't bothered by his lack of attention. I kept texting his boss, usually when my husband was in the office. I found it weird that my husband couldn't make time for me, but his boss could. I thought that maybe I wasn't just a priority to my husband. Days passed like this. One day I went to the mall to go shopping, and I asked my husband for money before he left for work. He gave me just a few hundred and said that we should save money right now, as we have to pay off the mortgage and everything. It was really annoying. Every time I asked him for something, he would tell me that we should save and list me some different expenses. I didn't say anything to him and went to the mall. I bumped into my husband's boss there. I didn't tell him that I was going to be there. He was surprised when I told him what I was getting. I said I was just window shopping. He said he was bored too and just came here to pass the time. He asked me if I wanted to hang out together. I said yes, so we went to random stores, just laughing and enjoying each other's company. I saw a limited edition LV bag. It was way off my budget, so I just looked at it with desire. I was longing for it, but I kept my feelings in check. My boss noticed it and told me to get the bag. I laughed and told him I couldn't afford it. He told me to get the bag and that he'd take care of it. I couldn't accept such an expensive bag from him, so I told him the same. He then started talking to the salesperson and bought the bag. I was in shock as he gave his card and bought the bag, which was worth $3. I was really surprised and impressed that he was doing that for me. I'm used to spending a lot of money, but my husband gets stressed about spending a few $100s. He gave me the bag and said it was a thank you for dinner the other day. I was still in shock about everything. I come from a middle-class family and I wasn't used to this type of spending. We discuss every expense and only spend money when we absolutely have to. My crush on him had intensified that day. I was still in that phase where I entered my house with that bag. My husband noticed the huge bag in my hand and asked me what I got. I showed him the bag, but instead of getting happy like I expected, he started asking all these questions about how much money I spent in that bag and where I got the money. I got irritated, and then decided it's better to not tell him the truth. I told him that it wasn't expensive, and I had thrifted it from a thrift store. He was confused as to he wasn't sure if he should believe me or not, but eventually he did. He said it made sense, and asked where I'd get the money to buy the bag from the store. I nodded and took my bag to my closet. I didn't mention anything else about the bag to him. He got busy with his work again, so I started texting his boss. I told him it was really thoughtful of him to give me the bag. We texted each other throughout the day. He knew me better than my husband did. He was actually interested in me, unlike my husband, who didn't have the time or money to care. I felt bad for thinking this. My boss was really interested in my hobbies and how I spent my time alone at home. He listened to everything I told him. My husband called me on a Monday to tell me that his boss had asked him to go out to town for a work meeting that night. He came home and packed his bag and then left for the airport. I was alone that night. I was in bed texting his boss about my day. We'd become friends. He was 30, single, and lived alone in his fancy apartment. He was funny, charming, and attractive. He asked if I wanted to have dinner with him the next day. I didn't need much convincing and agreed. I couldn't wait to see where he'd take me. My husband and I only ate at home and rarely took takeout because it was cheaper than going out. I never got the chance to dress fancy at the restaurants I went to, but I felt that I was finally getting my chance to enjoy everything when my husband called me the next day to ask how things were at home. I told him everything was fine. I was confused as to whether to tell him that I was going for dinner with his boss or not. I decided it's better to not share that with him. He would have asked too many questions, and I wasn't ready for those questions at that point in time. I got ready just in time as the doorbell rang and the boss he was waiting for me on the doorstep. We got into his car and drove to the restaurant. He took me for dinner at a really fancy place. I thought we'd be sitting in a private booth, but that wasn't the case. I didn't know how to feel about the situation. I was in a top-rated restaurant in the city with my husband's boss. I decided not to overthink it and just go with the flow. He ordered me wine, and after a few drinks, we started flirting more than we had on texts. It was a nice change to experience this with him. My husband used to flirt with me before we got married, but then the responsibilities of life took over and romance took a back seat. That night, flirting was back on the front seat again, and I loved every second of it. I was tipsy, and I don't know what came over me as I went to his side of the booth and then kissed him on the cheeks. We suddenly kissed each other with lots of passion, and it seemed so good. I had never in my dreams thought about kissing someone in such a fancy place. After some time, as I suddenly realized what I was doing and pulled back from him. I felt guilty for going behind my husband's back like this. My boss started comforting me, telling me it was okay and I had done nothing wrong. The way he comforted me made me more emotional, so I hugged him again. He then took me to his house. He knew that I was attracted to him, and I knew he was attracted to me as well. That night, I slept with him. I had thought to not think about the consequences and enjoy this small good part of my life. My husband called me while I was at my boss's house. He told me he was going to the airport and would be home by the evening. I told him I couldn't wait for him to come back to me. I then thought I'd gone too far, even though we didn't like that 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 we didn't like that. We didn't like that 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 we didn't. I smiled at him to make things less awkward and then made my way to leave his house. He stopped me before I could go though and asked when we'd see each other again. I wasn't sure what he meant by that, but I was happy he wanted to see me again so soon. I just didn't know how I could do this without my husband finding out. I told him I was worried about that, but he said I didn't need to be. He said he'd make sure my husband doesn't find out. I believed him because I also wanted to meet him again. I knew I was doing the wrong thing, but I couldn't control myself. I wanted this man a lot. He said he'd make plans for us and let me know via text. He kissed me again, and then I left for my home. My husband came back in the evening, just as I was done cooking his favorite pasta. He seemed happy. He told me that his work has gone really well and he can soon expect a promotion. I was happy for him, but I had my doubts. Would he still treat me like his boss treated me after he got promoted? I was confused about what I was doing. Was I making a mistake? Or was I grabbing a lifetime opportunity to have fun and enjoy luxuries I wouldn't get with my husband? I didn't let my doubts change my mind. I deserved to have fun, so I started seeing my husband's boss behind his back. He would text me the location, and I would meet him there while my husband was away. At work, his boss made sure that my husband was busy with work so we could spend more time together. I felt a little bad that he was so occupied from work because of my selfish desires, but then the boss told me that my husband liked to work. He was enjoying it, and I knew that was true because he liked spending more time at work than with me. I let the guilt go and enjoyed the moments. The boss always had some or other expensive gift for me. It was like he knew what was going to make me happy. Sometimes he would get me makeup, and he'd sometimes take me to stores like Dior and let me pick whatever I wanted. I loved it. I couldn't remember the last time I was so happy. I made sure that I hid all the gifts in the closet so that my husband would never find out about them. I had no explanation if he ever came to find out about that. My boss took care of all my needs and everything I wanted. He made sure I got it. I made sure that we were happy in the bedroom. My husband and I had a great sex life. I stopped getting away before I started my affair, so he didn't doubt anything when I started my affair. I finally thought that this could be my ideal life. I had stopped fighting with my husband because there was no need anymore. I was getting those things from Bose, and everything was finally okay in our life. My husband was so focused on work that he didn't have time for arguments. I had stopped complaining, and we were living the idyllic life I had always dreamed of. But then reality hit, and I had to face the truth about my actions. One day while I was in the kitchen, in the morning, my husband asked if I had seen his blue tie. I told him I'd kept it somewhere in the closet, but I didn't remember exactly where. I went back to making breakfast when I heard him coming downstairs with a luxury brand bag. He asked me what this Dior scarf was. I was completely taken aback when he asked me about the bag. I'd forgotten that I'd hidden my gifts in the closet. I started thinking of a lie on the spot, and eventually told him that it belonged to a friend of mine. She just told me to keep it there. It's a very expensive bag, and she was moving houses and didn't want it to get damaged or lost. He believed me, and then I took the bag from him and told him that I'd keep it back and get his tie on the way back as well. I immediately went and checked if he'd seen any other bags. But fortunately for me, it was only this bag. I thought about hiding the gifts somewhere else, but then I forgot about it. I got busy with other things and it slipped my mind again. One day, my boss and I were going to a very exclusive VIP event. He had been invited, and I was going there as his +1. I told my husband that I was going. I was going to meet my friend and help her pack as she was moving to a new house. I told him it would get late, so I'd spend the night there and come back the next day. He said it was fine for me to take care. I got dressed in a beautiful Chanel dress. I couldn't believe my luck. A few months ago, I was window shopping at the mall because I couldn't afford anything. Now I'm getting dressed in Dior and Chanel. The evening was beautiful. There were many photographers. It was a gallery opening of a celebrity artist, and various celebrities were in attendance. There were various photographers as well. I was just enjoying the evening, not really paying attention to anything. I'm not used to being in places with so many high-profile people. I then went with the boss to his home and spent the night there with him. I got back home the next day around noon, thinking that my husband would be in the office. I didn't expect to find my husband sitting in the living room reading the newspaper. I asked him why he didn't go to the office as I made my way to the kitchen to make some coffee. I heard him telling me that he was waiting for me. I thought it was weird but let it go. He then asked me. I told him it was nice, but it wasn't. I'd lied about how I'd helped my friend pack. By the time I'd finished my story, my husband was in the kitchen. He looked angry, but I didn't know why. I asked him what was wrong, and he showed me the newspaper. There was a picture of me in his boss's arms taken at the gallery. It was a small picture, but it was clear that it was me and him. I looked at my husband to tell him something about how it wasn't true, but the anger in his eyes made me stop. He then went and brought all the bags that I had hidden. I even forgot to take the bills out of the closet. All of those bills were signed to his boss. I was in a really bad situation. My husband got even angrier after that. He told me that I didn't think I would go so low just for fame and money. He then asked me if I was sleeping with his boss. I was in tears. There was no point in denying what had happened, so I just nodded and kept crying. He looked hurt for a moment, but then told me to leave his house. He said he never wanted to see me again. I tried to go closer to him to hug him and apologize, but he stepped back. He left the house and told me that he wanted me gone by the time he got back. I called the boss in tears. I was going to ask him if I could stay over at his place for a few days, but a woman picked up his phone. I asked her who she was, and she told me that she was his fiancée. I was pretty shocked. He told me he was single and lived alone in the city. The woman on the phone must have known who I was, because she started calling me names for sleeping with her fiancé. I couldn't believe what she was telling me after getting yelled at, so I ended the call. I didn't know what to do. I'd lost my husband and had nowhere to go. The boss had also lied to me. I didn't know he had a fiancé. I wasn't going to become homeless. I sat in my living room and thought about how I could convince my husband to forgive me. I'd believed that once he knew I was waiting for him to come back home. He came back after 3 or 4 hours with bloody knuckles. I asked him what had happened, but he didn't reply. He looked at me with murder in his eyes. I went to get the first aid box and came to him, but when I touched his shoulder, he pushed me away. He told me that he had gone to see his boss and punched him. He also told me that he had a fiancée. He looked at me with murder in his eyes and asked why I was still there. I went to get the first aid box and came to him, but when I touched his shoulder, he pushed me away and started telling me everything was up for me. He told me he'd gone to see his boss and punched him. Then he told me he had a fiancée. He laughed when he saw my face. I could tell he was trying to play me. He told me his fiancée was living in Canada and they were doing long distance. Then he told me the whole truth. His fiancée had seen the picture and come here to talk to him. She will take him back. And you'll have nowhere to go, he said angrily. I asked him why he couldn't take me back like she had. He laughed and said that he wasn't stupid like her. My husband had talked to his boss's fiancée and even convinced her to forgive him. He knew that if she forgave him, he could end things with me and keep the option open that I could go with his boss. He said that he wasn't going to end things with me, but that he would keep the option open that I could go with his boss. He then scanned all the bags and looked me in the eye. He told me that I had been unfaithful to him. He then laughed as my phone rang. My husband told me that his boss was calling me. He said to pick up the phone. His boss told me that his fiancée had given all the gifts back, so I should send them back to their home. I was shocked, but I didn't know what else to do. My husband kept smirking at me. I went to my closet and picked out all the gifts that he had given me. When I got back, my husband was waiting in the living room. He told me that he'd already called the lawyer and that the divorce proceedings would start soon. I asked him to give me another chance, but he didn't listen. He said I was the worst person on the planet and that I should leave the house immediately. I packed a bag and left the house. I went to stay with a friend for a few nights, but her husband came back from his trip and she said it was best that I leave. Even my closest friend didn't trust me to be around her husband anymore, so I left the house. I went to stay with my parents for a while. They hadn't spoken to me since my husband had told them the truth, but they let me stay for a few days. My husband's lawyers contacted me soon after and told me about the divorce proceedings. I started looking for a job, but it was difficult to find one since I had no experience. I got married straight after college. I felt like I'd suddenly been thrown into the lowest phase of my life just because of greed and desire. I lost one of the most important relationships of my life. The divorce process began, and it was done quite quickly. I'd expected it to drag on for a year. I'd hoped that maybe within this year I could seek forgiveness from my husband, but all hope was in vain. The process only took 3 months. Even in those 3 months, my husband made sure to have minimum contact with me. His lawyers handled everything from his end, whereas my lawyers represented my side. The court didn't grant me any substantial alimony. The facts were stacked against me, and my husband's lawyers were on top of their game. My lawyers couldn't do much to help. I had already lost everything: my husband, my marriage, and even the chance to be with my affair partner. Thanks to my husband, it was all. I take responsibility for my actions. I can't blame my husband for what happened to me because he was just reacting to my behavior. I've been meaning to update you all for a while. I see all your comments. I know I made a mistake. I was young and thought I was missing out on my life by being with my husband. My husband worked hard and struggled, but I thought that was unimportant. I've taken a job as a nanny, which isn't well paid, but it's something. I've moved to a studio apartment in a less desirable area of the city. I feel like I've lost hope. I've lost all hope of anything good happening to me now. I've become the wife who slept with her husband's boss just because she wanted expensive gifts. Everyone who knows what has happened looks at me with disgust in their eyes. I just keep my head down, feeling ashamed and guilty for what I've done. My husband, on the other hand, is doing really well. He got a promotion at work, and now he's wearing expensive suits. He's on the ladder of success, while I'm on the road to hell. I've heard from someone that he's also started dating someone really hot. I feel happy for him, even though I'm sad for myself. I could have been that woman. If I had been patient and stuck with him through his struggles, I could have been the one enjoying all the luxuries. He deserves all the success that is coming his way. In fact, he deserves every bit of it, while I deserve all the hurt and shame I feel every day. Thank you everyone for listening.